They say every storm leaves something behind. Branches broken, roads flooded, hearts rearranged. But I never thought the storm that came to Everpine Ridge that December would leave behind me, or him, or the tiny heartbeat growing quietly inside me. Picture this. A snowstorm whispers over a silent mountain town. I'm sitting on the stone steps of St. Matthew's Chapel in a soaked wedding dress, mascara dried into ghostly trails. Not crying, not screaming, just still. Frozen. Abandoned. You see, when you get left at the altar while 6 months pregnant, you don't get a dramatic scene. You get silence. You get whispers and pitying looks. You get people who don't know what to say, so they say nothing and leave. But he stayed. He wasn't a groom, not even a guest. Just a man with tired eyes and a violin case. Someone who knew the taste of loneliness and the weight of starting over. He sat beside me, not to fix, not to judge, but simply to witness what no one else did. That even a shattered woman still has value. That maybe, just maybe, she isn't as alone as she thinks. This isn't just a story about heartbreak. It's about grace, about belonging, about the kind of love that doesn't arrive with vows, but stays with tea, silence, and steady hands. So stay with me, because the ending isn't what you think. Subscribe to John's Stories on YouTube to hear more tales that tug your heart, stir your soul, and stay with you long after. The snow had started early that morning, dusting the rooftops like powdered sugar on untouched gingerbread homes. It didn't scream like some storms do. It whispered, softened everything. And I sat there, me, Emily Ward, on the chapel steps, no longer a bride, not yet a mother, and definitely not someone you'd call whole. My gown clung to me like regret, heavy, wet, and cold. My fingers ached through the cheap fingerless gloves I'd insisted were boho chic. Now they were just sad. My hair? Don't ask. Curled and pinned for a fairy tale, now matted and wind-blown like a forgotten scarecrow. But the real story was beneath the satin. I was carrying a little girl. She didn't have a name yet, just kicks, flutters, and dreams I scribbled into a weathered brown notebook no one had ever read but me. I pulled it out again, like a lifeline, and flipped through names I'd once whispered to the ceiling on sleepless nights. Lila, because it felt like laughter. Arya, soft like moonlight. Maeve, because something about that name felt like strength and stillness and surviving. And then, without realizing, I whispered it. Nobody wants my baby. Not out loud, not really. Just enough that the cold took it and tossed it into the air like breath. But someone heard. The chapel door creaked behind me. "Are you okay, miss?" I didn't turn right away. I didn't need to. The voice wasn't pushy or over-concerned. It was just present. When I finally turned my head, I saw a man standing with a travel bag slung over one shoulder and snow already settling into his collar. Mid-30s, tall but not intimidating. He looked at me like I wasn't broken glass to be avoided, but something quietly valuable. His name was Ryan Cole. And while I didn't know it then, Ryan wasn't just anyone. He was the man who would change everything. He didn't flinch when he saw me. Not the dress, not the belly, not the mess. He just nodded once, like he understood that silence was sometimes safer than words. "Mind if I sit?" he asked. I should have said no. I didn't even know this man. But I shrugged, and he took that as permission. He lowered himself onto the step beside me, careful, like I was a wild animal that might run. I didn't. We sat there, not speaking. And that, somehow, said more than if he'd launched into cliches like, "You'll be okay," or "his loss." It was weirdly comforting how his presence didn't demand anything from me. Finally, I asked, "You were the one playing violin before?" He smiled faintly, guilty. "You're good," I murmured. "I heard it before, everything fell apart." "I noticed," he said gently, "but only because you were the only one not faking a smile." That made me laugh. Not a real laugh, more like a broken breath, but it was something. Here's where things started shifting, and maybe I didn't notice it then, but later it became clear. Ryan didn't see me as a walking tragedy. He noticed the notebook on my lap. "That's a beautiful cover," he said. I didn't answer, just held it tighter. "Is it names?" he asked softly. I don't know what came over me, but I handed it to him, just like that. No hesitation. He flipped through it like it was scripture, pausing at Maeve. "That one," he said. "It's beautiful. She'll never hear it." "Why not?" I looked away, hand unconsciously covering my belly. "Because I'm not enough." He didn't interrupt, didn't offer false reassurance, just returned the notebook and, to my surprise, reached for my hand. His was warm, solid. He wasn't trying to pull me up or lead me somewhere. He was just there. And for the first time that day, I let myself believe maybe, just maybe, someone would stay. Now, let me pause here and tell you something I've learned. Not just from Ryan, but from countless others I've met since who've walked through a version of this story. The people who save us don't always come in with capes. Sometimes they come with nothing but presence, a quiet steadiness that says, "You don't have to pretend around me." I know a woman named Teresa who once told me how her neighbor, a retired nurse, sat with her through 3 hours of a panic attack. Didn't call 911, didn't lecture, just sat, hummed a hymn, and let her shake. And my cousin, when he came out, it wasn't his parents' acceptance that saved him. It was his math teacher slipping a note into his locker that said, "You're seen, you're safe." Sometimes staying is the most radical kind of love. That night, Ryan offered me something I didn't know I needed. A warm roof, tea, no strings, no questions. He said it was just shelter. "You don't owe me anything." He said it like he knew what it was like to owe the world too much already. His cabin was 10 minutes away, tucked in a grove of snow-drenched evergreens. Not lavish, not cold. It smelled like cedar and cinnamon and some faint trace of lemon floor cleaner. It smelled like home. Photos lined the hallway. One of a woman with sun-warmed skin holding a little boy, smiling so hard her eyes nearly closed. There were books everywhere, a half-built Lego set in the living room, and laughter upstairs. "Dad, it's really snowing!" The boy slid down the stairs in socks and stopped when he saw me. He introduced us. "Emily, this is my son Jacob. Jake, this is Miss Emily. She's our guest." Jake didn't look shocked or confused. He just stared at my belly and asked, "Is there a baby in there?" I smiled. "There is." "What's her name?" I froze. The name caught in my throat. Jake answered for me. "We should call her Jellybean. She looks like one." I laughed. For the first time all day, it was real.
The laugh faded, slowly, not abruptly, but like candlelight flickering at the end of a long night. I wasn't used to feeling warmth that didn't come from tea or blankets. But in that living room, wrapped in a navy fleece beside a chattering little boy, something inside me thawed, slow, cautious, and new. Jake told me about dinosaurs, how T-Rexes were overrated and Ankylosaurus was the real MVP. He hated matching socks. His grandma was always losing at dominoes, which made him laugh uncontrollably. I listened. I really listened. Not because it was polite, but because for once I wanted to remember every word someone said to me. Ryan handed me a steaming mug of peppermint tea. "Thank you," I said. both hands around it like it was a holy relic. "You're welcome," he replied, and the silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was full, settled. Then I saw her in the photo frames, the woman with the kind eyes, the one holding Jake. I asked quietly, "Your wife?" He nodded. "Amelia. She passed 3 years ago. Rainy night, tire skid. She didn't make it to the hospital." There was no tremor in his voice, but I could feel the scar beneath every syllable. "I didn't think I'd make it either," he admitted. But Jake, he needed more than someone who kept the lights on. He needed me present. And to be honest, I think I needed that too. That moment hit me like a soft brick, because I realized I'd been mourning a man who left me, but not the version of myself who'd been fighting to survive. And somehow that version deserved more. I looked down. My voice came out so small I barely recognized it. I said, "She doesn't have anyone. No grandparents, no father, just me. And I'm terrified I won't be enough." Ryan didn't interrupt, didn't jump to comfort me with cliches. Instead, he looked me dead in the eye and said the 4 words I had needed to hear for months. "You're not alone anymore." The fire cracked softly. Jake had fallen asleep curled up under the blanket, one arm flopped over a stuffed dinosaur. I watched him, then shifted my hand to rest gently over the swell of my stomach. And I swear, I felt her move. Not just a flutter. It was as if she could feel the shift in me too, as if she was listening. Ryan sat across from me, empty mug in hand, gaze soft. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. Because in that quiet, something loud happened inside me. A realization. Not about love, not yet, but about trust. About being seen and not having to prove my worth. He glanced at my notebook again, the one still resting near my leg. "Have you ever dreamed a name for her?" he asked. I smiled faintly. "Once, I dreamed I was in a field of snow, holding a baby wrapped in a blue blanket. Someone asked me her name, and without thinking, I said, 'Maeve.'" "Maeve," he repeated, rolling the name in his mouth like it meant something. "Little light in winter." I nodded. I gave it that meaning after I woke. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a pencil. "May I borrow your notebook?" he asked. I hesitated, then passed it to him again. He flipped to a blank page and wrote slowly, carefully. "Silas," he said aloud, "meaning of the forest, for a boy who'd grow strong even when it's cold." I didn't respond, couldn't. My throat had tightened too much. "You thought about names?" I finally asked. He said, "After Amelia," eyes never leaving the page. I didn't think I'd love again, but Jake needed hope, so I started writing names, just in case. We sat with that, no need to explain further. I turned to a new page and wrote carefully and slowly, "Maeve, Grace, Cole. Brave little light in winter." Just a name, just a line of ink, but it felt like the beginning of something I couldn't name yet. 3 days later, a letter arrived. White envelope, no return address, just my name scribbled in a handwriting I hadn't seen in weeks but would never forget. Derek. My hand shook as I opened it. "Emily, if you're still in town, please meet me. I know I was wrong. You have every right to hate me, but please give me a chance to say what I should have said before." No apology, no mention of Maeve. Just a request. And my chest, it didn't tighten with fear or fury. It just settled, like it already knew what to do. The next afternoon, Ryan was helping Jake tie toy dinosaurs to the porch railing when a knock came at the door. I was in the kitchen making tea. I glanced out the window. Derek was really there. Polished coat, composed face, perfect hair, like he'd rehearsed this moment in the mirror. But behind his eyes, hesitation. "Want to handle it?" Ryan asked gently. I shook my head. No, this one is mine. I opened the door. Cold air brushed past me, crisp and indifferent. "Emily," he said, his voice softer than I remembered. "You look different." "I'm not standing on a church step anymore," I replied, calm. "I'm not wearing white. I'm not begging someone to show up for me." He swallowed. "I panicked. I was scared. I didn't know how to—" "You had your chance," I said. And I meant it. When I called and you didn't answer. When I sat alone with a notebook full of names you never wanted to hear. I came back. Too late. "Emily, we could still—" "No," I cut him off. "You left when it mattered most." He looked down. No defense left, no lies strong enough to float anymore. "What did you name her?" he asked. I looked him square in the eye. "Maeve Grace Cole." His face twitched. "Cole? She deserves a name tied to kindness, not blood, belonging." He nodded, but said nothing. I closed the door. Not in anger. Just enough. Outside, Ryan stood quietly by the porch post. He hadn't watched, he hadn't interrupted. I stepped beside him, quiet for a moment. "You heard all that?" I asked. He said, "I saw him and I saw you, standing steady." I looked out at the frost-covered trees. I used to think I was weak, that I needed someone like him to be a mother. Ryan shook his head softly. "I never thought you needed anyone." I turned to him. "You didn't try to fix me. You didn't play the hero. You just stayed. And sometimes that's everything." Later that night, as I tucked Jake into bed, he blinked up at me and asked, "Who was that man?" I smiled. "Just someone from the past." "Did he make you sad?" I smiled. "Once, maybe, but not anymore." Jake yawned, rolled to one side. "'Cause now you got Jelly Bean and my dad too, right?" I glanced toward the kitchen. Ryan was rinsing teacups, sleeves rolled up, quiet, steady. A picture with no words, but somehow the safest place I'd ever known.
I kissed Jake's forehead and whispered, "That's right. I have us." That night, the storm returned. The wind picked up slowly at first, brushing against the cabin windows like fingers tracing forgotten memories. The snow thickened, as if the sky was folding in. I sat at the wooden kitchen table, nursing another cup of peppermint tea. The fire crackled in the hearth. Jake was already in bed, snoring softly, wrapped in fleece and the innocence of someone whose world had never truly shattered. Ryan was reading on the couch, not saying much, just flipping pages. Every now and then he'd glance up, not with worry, but with awareness. He had a way of watching that didn't make you feel small. He noticed without making a scene. I shifted in my chair and winced. A tightness gripped my lower back. Ryan looked up. "You okay?" "Just a twinge," I said too quickly. But I wasn't okay. The next hour blurred. The pain came and went like waves, small at first, like distant thunder, but then sharper, closer, real. By 11 p.m., I could barely stand. I leaned against the armchair, one hand gripping the cushion, the other wrapped protectively around my belly. My breathing was shallow, sweat clinging to my back. I gasped. "Ryan!" He was beside me in a heartbeat. "Is it time?" I nodded, pale. "Too soon, but yes." He didn't panic. He didn't fumble for keys or shout orders. He just reached for my hand, grounded me with his calm. We've got this," he whispered. The contractions came hard. They stole my breath, crushed my ribs, lit my nerves on fire. I had never felt anything so powerful or so terrifying.
I remember thinking, I am going to break. I am going to fall apart right here. I can't do this, I whispered, tears leaking from the corners of my eyes. Ryan, I'm scared. What if I mess this up? What if something goes wrong? He knelt beside me, placed his hand on my back with the kind of steady reassurance that no emergency room could offer. There is no wrong, he said. There's only you and her. Your body knows. I'm just here to remind you, you're not alone. His words grounded me, but more than that, they wrapped around something wounded in me and pulled it back to life. I breathed. I cried. I screamed. I shook. And then just as the wind howled loud enough to rattle the windows, something inside me shifted again. Push, he said, eyes locked with mine. You're almost there. The world narrowed to pain, to pressure, to purpose. And then a cry. Small, fragile, fierce. Ryan caught her, trembling. A squirming flame of life, red and raw and perfect. He placed her gently on my chest, tears streaming down his cheeks, though he didn't try to hide them. Your daughter, he said softly. I wrapped my arms around her, my body instinctively curled, shielding her from the cold and the world and everything that had come before. Hello, my love, I whispered. Maeve, Grace, I've waited so long for you. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, she breathed. And with every tiny inhale, I felt a part of me knit back together. No doctors, no hospital beeping, no grand announcement, just firelight, candle flicker, a man, a woman, and a child. It wasn't picture perfect. It wasn't polished. It was real. Later that week, I found myself in the rocking chair, Maeve nestled against my chest, wrapped in a woolen blanket. Her head barely the size of my palm, her fingers clinging to my shirt like roots claiming earth. Ryan was peeling apples in the kitchen. Jake sat at the table coloring dinosaurs, humming to himself. No one was talking, but the silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt full. Like a melody without words, a symphony of ordinary magic. I glanced at the hallway shelf. My notebook was there, open to the page where her name was written. I added a small line beneath it. Born in a snowstorm, loved before she took her first breath. I didn't know what would happen tomorrow or next week, but for the first time, I didn't need to. I had stopped surviving. I was living. A few days passed, and life quietly made itself known. Ryan didn't try to impress me with gestures. No "you should stay" speeches. No romantic confessions. Just simple things. Refilling my tea, folding baby clothes, offering a knowing nod when Maeve cried at 3 a.m. And Jake? He acted like I'd always been there. He'd plot beside me and ask if tyrannosauruses would have made good babysitters. They wouldn't. There was one moment I won't forget. Ryan sat beside me on the porch, snow still coating the trees like frosting on pine needles. He had his violin in his lap, not tuning it, just holding it. Without warning, he stood, stepped into the yard, and began to play. No stage, no audience. Just one man and his music in the falling snow. The notes rose, fragile, aching, full of stories no words could carry. Maeve stirred in my arms, her tiny mouth twitching as if the song was pulling her into dreams. I watched Ryan, this man who had stayed, who had not promised me forever, but had given me every single moment. I stepped forward. Our shadows met in the snowlight. I didn't need a wedding. I didn't need a title, because everything that mattered was already mine. He looked at me, one hand still holding the bow, the other gently touching the front of his coat right over his heart. "I'll say yes," I whispered, barely a breath, "as long as you never stop choosing me again." Time passed, not with grand declarations, but with teacups warmed and cooled, with shared silence, with mornings where no one had to be alone anymore. 1 year later, Maeve was walking. Her tiny boots left zigzag prints in the snow as she waddled after Jake, who was now proudly her big brother. I followed slowly, backpack slung over one shoulder, filled with snacks and scarves, and the kind of peace I once thought I'd never know. We stopped at the top of a small sledding hill. Jake jumped on first, squealing with joy. Ryan held the rope at the front, smiling over his shoulder. I sat behind him, Maeve between us, curled into my chest. The sled began to glide, softly, like a lullaby across white velvet. As we slid, I thought of the names in my notebook, the ones I once wrote in secret, the ones whispered to no one in a dark apartment when I believed no one would ever stay. And I added a final line to that page in my mind. The names were never wasted. The silence only made room for music.
That afternoon, the sun melted gently through the trees, just enough warmth to remind the world that winter doesn't last forever. Maeve had fallen asleep on my chest, her breath warm against my collarbone, her tiny hand still curled into a fist, as if holding onto something only she could see. I gently adjusted the woolen blanket around her shoulders and rocked her in that old chair near the fire, back and forth, back and forth. Ryan came in from outside, brushing snow from his sleeves. He set down a basket of firewood and smiled, not the kind that shows teeth, but the kind that speaks through the eyes. He didn't say a word, and he didn't have to. He walked over, sat beside me, and placed his hand on the back of the rocking chair, his fingers brushing my shoulder gently. We didn't need labels. We didn't need grand gestures. We just needed this. Jake glanced up from his coloring book, crayons scattered like tiny soldiers across the table. He looked at me, then at Ryan, and I could tell, without him saying a thing, something had shifted. He didn't call me Mom. He didn't call Ryan Dad. But he looked at us like we belonged to each other. Not by blood, not by ceremony, but by something stronger. Choice. Later that evening, Jake wandered over to the rocking chair. He stood beside me, one hand on the armrest, the other clutching his favorite green dinosaur. "Can I hold her?" he asked. I blinked. "Maeve?" He nodded. I carefully placed her in her arms, guiding him the way I'd seen Ryan do with firewood. Steady, cautious, reverent. Jake stared at her like she was the rarest thing in the universe. "She smells like cookies," he whispered. I laughed. "She smells like formula and your socks." He grinned, then looked serious. "Is she gonna stay?" That hit me harder than I expected. I nodded. "She's part of us now." He nodded once, as if confirming something he'd been debating in his own little heart. "Then, I guess I'm a big brother forever." He kissed her forehead, and just like that, everything I'd feared about broken families, absent fathers, being not enough, shattered and blew away like snow off the pine trees. That night, after Maeve was tucked into the bassinet and Jake had fallen asleep under a blanket of dinosaur sheets, I joined Ryan out on the porch. The stars were spilling across the sky like someone had shaken glitter over black velvet. The air was still, the kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty but earned. He didn't look at me when he spoke. "She changed you," he said softly. I nodded. She healed parts of me I didn't know were bleeding. He turned, finally. I'm proud of you. That wrecked me more than any love confession ever could. Not because it was romantic, but because it was true. I stepped closer, slipped my hand into his. We stood like that for a long time. No titles, no promises, just warmth. I used to think I had to prove myself worthy of love, that I had to be perfect to be chosen. But I was wrong. Love, real love, isn't loud. It's the cup of tea left by your elbow when you're too tired to speak. It's the violin music under snowfall when words don't work. It's a man who doesn't rescue you, but makes space for you to rescue yourself. I met a woman once years after all of this. We were sitting in a waiting room, both of us holding babies on our laps. She was tired, her eyes sunken with sleepless nights and unanswered texts. She asked me if I ever felt like I was doing it wrong. I said, only every day, but my daughter still laughs, and that's how I know I'm doing something right. She cried right there in the waiting room, and I didn't tell her to stop. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is keep showing up. Even if your hands shake, even if your heart breaks, show up anyway. 1 year later, Maeve took her first step in the snow. She waddled awkwardly in those tiny, puffy boots, arms flailing like she was trying to fly. Jake ran ahead, leaving a zigzag trail of footprints behind him, laughing like only kids who feel safe can laugh. I stood at the top of the hill, backpack slung over one shoulder, snacks rattling inside. I watched them both, my heart so full it felt like it would tear through my ribs. Ryan stood beside me, holding the sled rope. His smile was quiet. He didn't say anything, just extended his hand. I took it. Maeve squealed, Jake cheered, and the sled glided forward again, this time with all of us on it. We didn't need a wedding. We didn't need perfect. We had the storm. We had the silence. We had the names whispered in darkness, now spoken in light. And in the final page of that old notebook, I wrote something I want to leave you with now. Sometimes, the people who don't show up simply made room for the ones who will. Maeve Grace Cole was never unwanted. She just hadn't been found by the right people yet. And neither had I. But we found each other. And that made all the difference. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to know they're not alone. And don't forget to subscribe to John's Stories channel for more voiceovers that bring you raw, real, unforgettable moments every single day. Thank you for staying with me until the end. This wasn't just her story. It's ours too. Because love doesn't have to be loud to last forever.